Here, guy. Who do you think you're calling? Who do you think you're calling?
The Pentagon.
In a small southern town, 90-year-old black war veteran Ezekiel Coleman walks into a diner for nothing more than a slice of pie. But systemic racism quickly turns his quiet visit into a storm, mocked, shoved, and unjustly arrested by deputies drunk on power. His dignity is tested until he makes one phone call that shakes the foundations of authority, a direct line to the Pentagon, where his old comrades still remember his sacrifice, as Maria, a young Latina waitress, risks everything to secretly record the abuse. The blue wall of silence begins to crack under the weight of truth, exposing the sheriff's department's cruelty to both the community and federal investigators. What begins as humiliation transforms into resistance, betrayal into revelation, and silence into sound, culminating in poetic justice as the corrupt officers are stripped of their badges while the town watches. Ezekiel reclaimed his seat at the diner not just as a customer, but as a monument to courage, memory, and the echo of one voice that refused to be silenced. The bell above the door gave a half-hearted jingle as Ezekiel Zeke Coleman stepped into the diner. 90 years old, his frame was thin but steady, his posture straighter than men half his age. His coat was pressed, his shoes shined, his fedora resting lightly on his head. The diner should have carried on with its lazy hum, forks on plates, chatter over coffee, the radio playing faint blues in the background. But the moment Zeke crossed the threshold, a hush fell. He noticed. He always noticed. "Afternoon, Mr. Coleman," the waitress at the counter said softly. Her voice was tight, rehearsed. She avoided his eyes, as though eye contact itself was a crime. Zeke tipped his hat. "Afternoon." He moved with slow dignity to his usual booth near the window. Every step seemed to echo. He slid in, placed his hat beside him, and exhaled. From the corner table, laughter erupted. Loud, coarse, the kind that demanded attention. "Look what we got here," one officer drawled. His badge gleamed, but his smirk gleamed brighter. "Didn't know the museum let folks out this early." The others chuckled, for young cops, all broad-shouldered, restless. They had been loud before, but now every word was sharpened for Zeke's ears. Zeke opened the menu, though he didn't need to. He always ordered the same thing: coffee, black, and a slice of pecan pie. "Bet he still thinks he can sit wherever he wants," another said, leaning back in his chair. "Ain't that right, Grandpa?" The diner shifted uncomfortably. Forks scraped, conversations died. Eyes went to plates, to the floor, anywhere but Zeke. The waitress approached timidly. "What can I get you, Mr. Coleman?" He gave her a gentle smile. "Coffee, black, and a slice of pecan, if it ain't too much trouble." She nodded quickly and hurried away. Behind him, boots scraped against tile. One officer rose, his shadow stretching across Zeke's table. "Sir," he said mockingly, "you sure you belong here? Folks your age, usually in homes, not diners." Zeke looked up slowly. His eyes, still sharp, met the young man's. He said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The officer leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Zeke could hear. "Don't think that uniform you wore back in the day means anything now. Times have changed." Zeke finally spoke, his tone calm but weighted. "Son, the ground you stand on was watered with blood. Men died so you could wear that badge." The cop's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He straightened, sneering. "Old stories don't mean nothin' here." At that moment, the waitress set down Zeke's coffee. Her hands trembled. The officer accidentally knocked it over. The cup clattered, hot liquid spreading across the table and dripping onto Zeke's lap. The diner gasped, but no one moved. Zeke dabbed himself with a napkin, his face expressionless. He looked up at the officer, voice steady. "That's supposed to scare me." The officer chuckled. "Supposed to remind you where you stand." Zeke leaned back, folding his hands. His silence carried more weight than any outburst. The diner returned to its unnatural hush, every eye secretly fixed on the confrontation. The officer returned to his table, muttering, "We'll deal with him proper soon." Zeke sipped from the fresh cup. The waitress quickly brought him. His eyes stayed on the window, watching the world pass, but his ears caught every poisoned laugh behind him. The war was not over. It had only changed uniforms. The diner's hum never returned. It stayed strangled in the throat of silence, broken only by the clink of dishes and the sharp laugh of the cops. Zeke stirred his coffee slowly, his hand steady, despite the insult that still steamed on his trousers. He didn't look at them. That was his choice. But they looked at him, circling like dogs. "Hey, Gramps," one of them called across the room. "You forget your cane outside." More laughter. Another added, "Man's probably older than the diner itself. I bet he fought in the Civil War." The chuckles rolled louder. The sheriff's deputy sitting with them, bigger, thicker, the leader of the pack, lifted his chin. His name was Deputy Ross Harlan, known in town for a mean streak behind the badge. Harlan stood and walked over, his boots striking the floor like gavel knocks. He stopped at Zeke's booth, looming. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, though he was already sliding into the booth across from Zeke. Zeke raised his eyes, calm and deliberate. "Suit yourself." The deputy leaned back, stretching. "Now, I've been hearing a lot about you. Folks say you were some kind of soldier back in the day. That true?" Zeke sipped his coffee. "Something like that, yeah." Harlan's grin widened. "Funny, 'cause all I see is a frail old man sittin' where he don't belong. This booth's usually for paying customers. You know, the waitress, Maria, froze mid-step across the room. She wanted to say something, but her lips stayed shut. Zeke's reply was soft. "My money's as good as anyone's." The deputy's grin dropped. He leaned forward, voice colder. "Don't get smart. I asked you a question." Silence again. Zeke let it stretch, his eyes steady as stone. The other officers laughed from their table. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue?" Harlan reached across suddenly and snatched Zeke's coffee mug, tilting it until a few drops spilled onto the table. "Tell me something. Why do you still come here? Huh? Why not stay home, where it's safe?" Zeke didn't flinch. He wiped the spill with his napkin, slow and precise. Then his voice cut through the diner like steel. "Because I've already given too much of my life to men like you. I won't give you this booth too." The diner stilled. Harlan's jaw tightened. He slammed the mug down so hard the ceramic cracked. "You think you're better than us?" Zeke's gaze never wavered. "No, I think I'm stronger." The room seemed to hold its breath. The deputy laughed, but it was strained. "Stronger? You can barely walk straight." He leaned closer, sneering. "Old man, you should have stayed in the ground with your generation." The insult hung, sour and heavy. Maria's hand trembled against the tray she carried. She glanced at the other customers, farmers, clerks, truckers, all pretending to be deaf. No one wanted trouble with the sheriff's boys. Zeke's voice dropped lower, nearly a whisper. "I've faced bigger men than you, in worse uniforms. And I buried them, too." For the first time, Harlan faltered. Something in Zeke's eyes unnerved him. But pride is a stubborn poison. He smirked again, covering the crack. "Guess we'll see how tough you really are." He rose from the booth, his chair scraping back. He turned to the others. "This old relic don't know his place. Might be time we remind him." The laughter picked up again, cruel and sharp. Maria finally whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Please, just leave him alone." But her words vanished under the clatter of boots and badges. Zeke sat still, finishing the last sip of his coffee. His hands didn't shake. His voice was steady. "You boys have no idea what war looks like," he murmured, though no one seemed to hear. The diner, once a place of meals and murmurs, now felt like a battlefield waiting to break open. And Zeke refused to retreat. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she retreated to the counter. She gripped the tray so tightly her knuckles went white. The cops had returned to their table, but their voices carried across the diner, like knives scraping metal. They weren't done. Not with him. Maria looked at Zeke. The old man sat tall, his back against the booth, his expression calm, as if the insults had been nothing more than weather. His stillness frightened her more than their noise. Her grandmother used to tell her stories of him. Senator Coleman, the war hero, the man who fought across the ocean while this town still kept its doors closed to him. Maria's grandfather once said Zeke had the eyes of someone who had seen hell but walked back with dignity. Now those same eyes stared quietly at his half-eaten slice of pie. "Bet he doesn't even remember his own name," one of the younger cops sneered. "Bet he can't even stand without help," another added. The laughter stung Maria's ears. She glanced at the sheriff's deputy Harlan, his smile mean, his posture relaxed. He fed on the silence of the diner, on the cowardice of its patrons. Maria's lips parted. She wanted to say something. She wanted to shout, "That man fought for you. He bled for this country while your fathers were still in diapers." But the words stuck in her throat. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind. 6 years old, with hair like tangled silk and a laugh that filled their small apartment. Rent was due. Her boss had warned her once already about causing scenes, so Maria stayed quiet. The cops rose again, circling like restless wolves. One brushed past her, making her tray rattle. He muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Better stay out of this, sweetheart. Don't want your pretty face losing a job." Her stomach dropped. Zeke didn't move. He let them approach. One officer stepped behind him, gripping his shoulder and pressing down hard, testing the old man's strength. "Still feel strong, Grandpa," the cop hissed. Zeke's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "Stronger than you know." The cop shoved harder. Zeke winced but didn't yield. Maria's breath caught. Every patron saw it. The abuse, the cruelty, the humiliation. Yet no one moved. A man near the window lifted his newspaper higher to shield himself. A couple in the corner pretended to argue over the bill. The silence was suffocating. The cop shoved Zeke again. "Say it. Say you're weak." Zeke lifted his head slowly, his voice breaking the stillness. "I fought Nazis when I was your age. You don't scare me." The diner froze. The cop's face twisted, and he pushed Zeke against the booth. The table rattled. Maria's lips trembled. She wanted to scream, but fear chained her to the floor. Inside her, a war raged, fear of losing her job, her home, her ability to feed her daughter against the shame of being complicit in silence. She whispered, so soft it barely left her lips, "I'm sorry." Zeke heard her. His eyes shifted toward her, and though his face showed no anger, his gaze was piercing. It was enough to make her look down at the floor. Ashamed, the cops laughed again, their cruelty echoing off the walls. The war hero endured, but the room itself was guilty, and Maria knew it. The diner felt colder now, though the September heat outside still pressed against its windows. Zeke sat pinned in the booth, the officer's grip digging into his shoulder. The laughter of the cops droned on, but inside his chest, a different sound stirred memory. That his eyes weren't on the cracked vinyl seat or the chipped coffee mug. They were on another battlefield, another uniform. 1944, France. The mud was thick with blood, and the air reeked of smoke. White soldiers barked orders, and the black troops were shoved to the front lines like expendable pawns. He'd seen boys younger than these cops die with courage. These men could never imagine. "Still think you're tough?" the officer hissed in his ear. Zeke blinked back to the present, his voice low. "You boys don't know the ground you're standing on." The officer frowned, confused. What? Zeke's gaze drifted past him, as though looking through decades. This whole town, every street, every brick, every field, all of it exists because men like me bled for it. And still, we had to eat at the back doors of diners like this. The cop pressed harder, annoyed at words he didn't understand. "Talk sense, old man." Zeke's jaw tightened, but he did not cry out. Pain had been his companion too long to betray him now. Maria stood frozen near the counter, her hands twisting the edge of her apron. She saw the tremor in Zeke's arm, but also the fire that lingered in his eyes. It wasn't weakness, it was memory. One of the other cops leaned on the booth, sneering. "What war you even fight in?" "Vietnam." Zeke chuckled, a dry sound. "I was done fighting wars before your fathers were born." Harlan approached again, towering. "He thinks he's some kind of hero." Zeke's eyes lifted to meet his. "No, heroes don't make it home." "I did." The words cut sharper than intended. For a moment, Harlan faltered. His smirk slipped, but pride wrapped around him like armor. "You think that makes you special?" Zeke's voice hardened. "It makes me dangerous." The diner fell still again. Even Maria stopped breathing. Dangerous. The word rolled heavy in the air. The deputy barked a laugh, shaking it off. "Dangerous? You can barely stand." "You're not dangerous, old man. You're pathetic." But his tone carried a tremor. Zeke shifted slightly, forcing the officer's grip to tighten on his shoulder. He winced, but his voice did not falter. "Uniforms change, faces change, but cowards stay the same." The officer shoved him roughly. "Watch your mouth." The sound of Zeke's body hitting the booth echoed through the diner. Maria gasped, but no one else moved. Forks scraped, chairs creaked, but not a single soul rose. Zeke straightened slowly, every bone protesting but his spirit unbroken. His hands rested on the table. "Steady. I buried better men than you before you ever carried that badge," he said quietly. The officers laughed louder, their bravado masking unease. Maria's throat burned. She wanted to shout, to throw the tray, to stand between them, but fear chained her down. She could only whisper to herself, Dios mío. The deputy smirked again, leaning over Zeke. You keep running that mouth, we'll drag you out of here, make you regret ever stepping foot inside. Zeke's eyes narrowed, a glint of steel beneath years of weathered calm. I stopped regretting a long time ago. The words were simple, but they landed heavy. Maria saw it. She saw the weight of history pressing down on this one man, the scars invisible but deeper than any wound. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't just an old man being harassed. This was a battle he'd been fighting his whole life. Old scars, new battles. The war had never ended. The tension broke like glass underfoot. Deputy Harlan's voice snapped sharp across the diner. Get him out of here. Chairs screeched back as two officers grabbed Zeke's arms, yanking him from the booth. The old man's body bent but did not break. He staggered as they pulled him toward the door, his hat falling to the floor. Maria's heart leaped. Please, stop, she cried before she could stop herself. The nearest officer shot her a glare so fierce it froze her in place. Sit down, sweetheart, not your business. Her lips trembled. She sat. The other patrons hunched deeper over their meals, pretending to chew, pretending not to hear the scrape of boots against tile, the sound of an old man being dragged like a criminal. Outside, the sun blazed, merciless and hot. They shoved Zeke onto the dusty pavement in front of the diner. A crowd had started to gather. Passers-by, curious faces peeking from storefronts, drivers slowing their cars. The air buzzed with silence and shame. One officer cuffed Zeke's wrists, the steel biting into his thin skin. You're under arrest for resisting, Harlan announced loudly. His words aimed at the watching crowd, disturbing the peace. You people saw it yourselves. The crowd murmured but stayed still. No one stepped forward. No one challenged the badge. Zeke lifted his head, his voice steady despite the rough hands holding him down. Resisting? I sat in a booth. Harlan smirked. You resisted me. That's enough. The other officers laughed. Maria had followed them outside, her apron fluttering in the hot wind. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but fear kept her feet rooted to the diner's doorway. Don't do this, she whispered. Please, he's done nothing. The sheriff turned his eyes on her, cold and sharp. Best remember your place, girl. Don't need to be explaining to your boss why you lost your job. The threat landed heavy. Maria shrank back into the shadows of the doorway. Zeke, on his knees, lifted his head. His voice carried over the murmuring crowd, calm and unyielding. You think this makes you men? 4 of you on one old soldier. Harlan's jaw clenched. He leaned down, sneering. You don't matter anymore. You're just another old black man we'll put in a cell and forget about. The words hung heavy in the air, shame thickening in the throats of the onlookers. Zeke inhaled deeply. His voice was low, deliberate, like the steady beat of a drum. I only need one phone call. The officers laughed, cruel and loud. What, you gonna call your nursing home? One jeered. Zeke's eyes never left. Harlan's no. I'm going to call someone who still remembers what I did for this country. And when I do, you'll wish you'd thought twice before putting your hands on me. For the first time, a ripple of unease crossed the deputies' faces. But Harlan shook it off with a bark of laughter. One call. Fine. You'll get it after you rot a night in my cell. He shoved Zeke toward the waiting cruiser. The cuffs bit deeper, but Zeke didn't wince. His eyes stayed sharp, locked on the horizon, as if he already saw what was coming. The crowd shifted uneasily. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth, tears threatening to spill. She wanted to scream, to run forward, to stop them, but fear chained her still. The door of the cruiser slammed shut. Inside the steel cage, Zeke closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, and in the silence of his mind, he repeated the words to himself like a promise. I only need one call. The holding room smelled of sweat and bleach. A flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, its light throwing hard shadows across the cinder block walls. Zeke sat on a metal chair, his wrists still cuffed. His body ached from being shoved into the seat, but his back was straight, his eyes steady. The officers clustered by the door, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Look at him, one said, thinking he's some kind of big shot. Bet his one phone call is to the retirement home. Another barked out a laugh, or his grandkids, if he's still got any. Deputy Harlan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smug grin plastered across his face. Go on then, Coleman. You said you only need one call. Let's see who's gonna save you. He slid the phone across the table with a flourish. One chance. Make it count. Zeke stared at the phone for a long moment. His cuffed hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the strain of lifting them, he picked up the receiver with deliberate care. The room grew quiet. The officers leaned closer. Expecting a joke, Zeke dialed slowly, each number pressed with precision. No hesitation. The line clicked, rang once, twice, then a voice answered, clipped. Professional, Pentagon operator. The room froze. Zeke's voice was calm, steady. This is Ezekiel Coleman, Sergeant, 24th Infantry Regiment, serial number. He recited it without pause, his memory razor sharp, even at 90. Tell them Coleman is being held by cowards in uniform in Jackson County. Tell them, it's urgent. The operator's voice shifted instantly, sharp with recognition. Yes, sir. Stay on the line. The officers stared, confusion rippling across their faces. Pentagon. One muttered. Harlan scoffed, forcing a laugh. He's bluffing. Old man's putting on a show. But unease gnawed at his tone. The line clicked again. A new voice, crisp, commanding. Sergeant Coleman, this is General Reynolds. We've been expecting your call. Zeke's lips curved faintly. Didn't think I'd need to make it this way. The general's voice hardened. Sir, say the word and I'll have immediate action. Where are you being held? Zeke glanced at the stunned faces in the room. His words were measured. Small town sheriff's department. 4 officers, 1 deputy. They think their badges make them bigger than the country I bled for. Silence on the line. Then, understood. Hold steady. Sergeant, we'll handle it. Zeke hung up. The room was deathly still. One officer stammered, what the hell was that? Another whispered, Did he just call the Pentagon? Zeke leaned back in the chair, his cuffed hands resting calmly on the table, his eyes locked on Harlan. I told you. One call. The phone on the wall rang less than 5 minutes later, loud, urgent. An officer picked it up, his hand shaking. Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The blood drained from his face as he listened. He turned to Harlan, voice trembling. It's Washington. They're demanding his release. The laughter was gone. Every officer stood stiff, their arrogance collapsing into panic. Harlan snatched the receiver, barking, This is Deputy Ross Harlan. What's his voice faltered as the voice on the other end thundered back. Zeke sat silently, watching their faces crumble. The war had shifted, and this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The sheriff's department buzzed with chaos. Phones rang, voices rose, doors slammed. The laughter that had filled the holding room earlier was gone, replaced by whispers edged with fear. Deputy Harlan paced like a cornered wolf, his jaw tight, his face red. It's a bluff. Has to be some old vet calling in favors. But his men didn't look convinced. One officer muttered, Sir, they said his name. They knew him. How would the Pentagon know his name if it was just a bluff? Another added, General Reynolds. I've heard that name before. He's big. The silence that followed was heavy. In the corner, Zeke sat cuffed. Calm as stone. His breathing was steady, his gaze unwavering. He didn't need to speak. The room was speaking for him. Maria slipped in through the side door. She had followed the patrol car on foot, heart hammering, apron still tied around her waist. She kept to the shadows, watching the storm unfold. 2 officers argued in low voices near the desk. This is bad, man. If the Pentagon's involved, shut up. Don't say that here. Maria's phone trembled in her hand. She lifted it discreetly, recording. The glowing red dot on her screen was the only courage she could muster. But it was enough. Harlan slammed a fist against the wall. Everyone shut your mouths. Nobody talks. Nobody admits anything. We'll say he resisted. We'll say he attacked first. We control the story. One of his men hesitated. But the girl, the waitress, she saw everything. Harlan's eyes snapped to Maria. Her breath caught as his glare cut through the room. What are you doing here? His voice was a growl. Maria's phone slid into her apron pocket, hidden, but her eyes betrayed her fear. I just came to see if he was okay. The deputy stalked toward her, towering. This doesn't concern you. Go home. For a moment, her legs wanted to obey, to run, but Zeke's eyes caught hers from across the room. Calm, steady, no anger, no fear, only dignity. Her hands stopped trembling. No, she whispered. I saw what you did. I'm staying. The room froze. The officers shifted uncomfortably. One muttered, This is spiraling. Another phone rang. The sheriff himself stumbled out of his office, pale, sweating. He snapped at Harlan. What the hell did you do? Washington's on my line. They're threatening an investigation. Harlan stammered. It was nothing. Just an old man mouthing off. An old man, the sheriff roared. That old man has more medals than this whole damn department put together. Do you have any idea who you laid hands on? Silence crushed the room. Zeke leaned back, his lips curving faintly. His voice, quiet but clear, cut through the air. The war never ended. Some of you just switched sides. The words landed heavy, heavier than any order from Washington. Maria pressed her phone tighter in her apron. She had the truth now, and no badge, no threat could silence it. The cracks had begun to spread. The sound of engines rolled down the street like distant thunder. Tires crunched over gravel, brakes hissed, doors slammed in unison. Every head inside the sheriff's department turned toward the window. Black SUVs lined the curb, tinted windows reflecting the late sun. Men in dark suits stepped out, their movements crisp, deliberate, efficient. The sheriff's face went ghostly pale. "Oh God," Deputy Harlan muttered. They can't." But his voice cracked with doubt. The front doors swung open. The agents entered without hesitation, their presence swallowing the room. One flashed a badge. Department of Defense, Sergeant Ezekiel Coleman is to be released immediately. The words rang like a verdict. No one moved. The agent's tone sharpened. Now, the cuffs came off Zeke's wrists in silence. Metal clattered against the desk, echoing louder than gunfire. Zeke flexed his hands slowly, calmly, as though he had expected this all along. Maria exhaled a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Harlan sputtered. He resisted arrest. The agent's eyes cut to him, cold as glass. "Save it. We have statements. We have recordings. We have Washington breathing down your neck. You just put your careers in the grave." Maria's heart leaped her recording. She slipped her phone from her apron and stepped forward, her hands trembling but steady enough to press play. The diner's scene spilled into the room. The mocking voices, the threats, the laughter, the sound of Zeke being shelved, Maria's plea, and Harlan's sneer. "You don't matter anymore." The silence after the playback was suffocating. The sheriff wiped sweat from his brow. "This isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like." The agent cut him off, and Washington will see it that way, too. The townspeople who had followed outside pressed against the glass, murmuring, shame rippling through the crowd. Word spread fast. Zeke stood, rolling his shoulders back. 90 years of history weighed on him, but his spine was unbending. He looked at Harlan, his eyes piercing. "You thought I was forgotten," he said quietly. "But the ground remembers, the blood remembers, and now, so does the world." Harlan's face twisted, caught between rage and fear. The agents confiscated the officers' weapons, stripping holsters clean. Badges clinked onto the desk, heavy with disgrace. One by one, the very symbols of their power were peeled away. Maria wiped her eyes, her chest tight. For once, the silence in the room wasn't complicity. It was judgment. The sheriff tried again, his voice desperate. "You can't just waltz in here," and the lead agent stepped forward, towering over him. "You laid hands on a decorated veteran, one of the last of his regiment. You humiliated him, mocked him, arrested him without cause. Do you know what that means for you?" The sheriff faltered. "It was a mistake." Zeke's voice cut through. "No, it was who you are." The words landed heavier than the agent's authority. The townspeople outside pressed closer, whispers spilling. Some looked ashamed, others angry, but all of them saw. Maria clutched her phone tight. For the first time all day, her fear gave way to pride. Zeke picked up his hat from the desk, brushed it off, and set it on his head. He walked toward the door with calm, measured steps. The crowd parted as he emerged into the fading sunlight. For the first time in hours, the old soldier breathed deeply, freely. Behind him, the men who mocked him sat stripped of their power, their empire of silence crumbling. "The war never ended," Zeke murmured, voice carrying into the crowd. "It just changed uniforms." And this time, the whole town heard it. The diner was quieter than usual. 2 days later, morning sun spilled through the blinds, dust dancing in the beams of light. Plates clinked softly, conversations whispered. The silence wasn't the same as before. It wasn't complicity anymore. It was shame. The bell above the door jingled, and every head turned. Ezekiel Coleman stepped in, hat in hand. 90 years old, but walking taller than the last time he'd entered this place. The room stirred, chairs scraped. For the first time in decades, people stood, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. Farmers, clerks, truckers, druckers, those who had averted their eyes days earlier, now rose to their feet. Maria froze behind the counter. a coffee pot in her hand. Her eyes welled with tears as she whispered, "Senator Coleman." Zeke tipped his hat to her. "Morning." She poured him coffee, her hands steadier than before. He took his booth by the window. The seat that once felt like contested ground now felt like his rightful place. A man at a corner table cleared his throat. "Mr. Coleman, I'm sorry I didn't speak up that day." Zeke looked at him, his gaze neither harsh nor forgiving, just steady. Silence protects no one. The words hung in the air like scripture. Maria set down a slice of pecan pie in front of him. Her voice trembled, but her chin was high. "I recorded everything. They can't hide it. Washington has it now." Zeke's eyes softened. "You broke the silence. That's more than most." Her tears fell then, splashing onto the counter. "I was so afraid of losing my job, my daughter. But I couldn't stay quiet. Not when you—" Her words broke. Zeke's hand, weathered and strong, rested gently over hers. "Fear's a chain. You broke it. Your voice can break more." Maria nodded through her tears, clutching his hand. The door jingled again. A group of townspeople entered, people who had watched, people who had pretended to eat while injustice unfolded. They approached Zeke's booth awkwardly, hats in hands, guilt in their eyes. One spoke for the group. "Sir, we should have done something. You didn't deserve that." Zeke studied them for a long moment. His face was calm, unreadable. Then he said, "What matters is what you do now, not what you failed to do then." The words hit harder than any lecture. Maria watched as they shuffled back, chastened but changed. Outside, the sheriff's department was under federal investigation. The deputies who once strutted with badges now walked with heads bowed, some already stripped of their posts. The town buzzed with rumors, shame, and a cautious kind of hope. Inside the diner, Zeke lifted his coffee. His reflection shimmered in the dark liquid, an old soldier, scarred but unbroken. For the first time in years, the silence in the diner wasn't against him, it was for him. And Maria knew, deep in her bones, that legacy had shifted. The silence that once protected cruelty had been pierced, and in its place, a sound was rising, small, fragile, but unstoppable. Night settled over the small town. The diner's neon sign flickered against the dark, buzzing faintly like a tired heartbeat. Inside, only a few stragglers lingered over coffee. Maria wiped down the counter, humming softly, her eyes drifting to the booth by the window. Empty now, but she could still feel him there. Zeke had left that morning, walking with the agents to give his statement. The Pentagon had wanted him in Washington, to testify not just about what happened here, but about the countless other times his dignity had been dismissed, his service forgotten. The phone behind the counter rang, startling her. She grabbed it, half expecting a complaint or order. Instead, a familiar voice rumbled on the other end. "Senorita Maria." Her heart leaped. "Mr. Coleman, you're safe." "I'm safe," Zeke said. His tone was steady, calm, but there was something beneath it, a gravity that made Maria's chest tighten. They listened. They asked questions. They're investigating deeper than just here. Maria clutched the receiver. "That's good, right? It's a start." Silence lingered, warm but heavy. Zeke continued, his voice slower now. "You gave them the recording. You gave me your courage. That matters more than you know. Sometimes it only takes one voice to echo loud enough that others can't ignore it." Maria swallowed back tears. "I was so afraid, but you looked at me like I mattered, like I wasn't small." "You aren't small," Zeke said simply. "Never believe the ones who try to make you so." Her throat closed. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. From the street outside, headlights cut across the diner. Two men in suits stepped inside, scanning the room. One approached Maria. "Is this the place where Sergeant Coleman sat?" Maria blinked, confused, then nodded. That man set down an envelope on the counter, stamped with a seal. His words are already moving upward. "Washington wants this community to know, justice is not optional. Investigations are ongoing. Changes will come." The men left as quickly as they arrived. Maria stared at the envelope, then opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, not from Washington, but from Zeke himself. Her eyes blurred as she read aloud. "Maria, if you're holding this, I want you to remember something. Battles are not always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought at kitchen tables, in classrooms, in diners. Sometimes the enemy isn't a soldier with a rifle, but silence wearing a neighbor's smile. You broke that silence. Hold that courage close, and pass it on. E. Coleman." Her tears dripped onto the page, staining the ink. The bell above the door jingled again. The diner filled with townsfolk, not in hushed avoidance this time, but with purpose. They asked for coffee, pie, and to sit in the booth by the window. They spoke Zeke's name out loud, some with shame, others with pride. Maria watched them, her chest swelling with something fierce. Change was slow, uneven, but it was happening. Across town, the sheriff's office was in ruins. Harlan had been dismissed pending charges. The sheriff himself was under review. The blue wall had cracked wide open, and the cracks were spreading. Maria pressed Zeke's letter to her chest. She walked to the booth by the window, set the letter gently on the table, and placed a slice of pecan pie beside it. Customers bowed their heads briefly, some in respect, some in guilt, but all in recognition. For the first time, the booth wasn't just Zeke's. It was a monument. Maria whispered, her voice trembling but clear. The war never ended, but maybe the silence did. And outside, the neon diner sign glowed brighter than before, humming not with weariness, but with defiance. The call had been made. The echo would not stop